from My Dreaming Soap. Welcome to my channel. Now, Mantra Swirls, there are two Mantra Swirls available to choose from. The original Mantra Swirl, which is what I'm going to do here, and then a Marbles Mantra Swirl, which is done in a slab mould. Okay, but I'm going to do the original Mantra Swirl here and go through how I made mine. So what I'm using today is for the Mantra Swirl. It's always good, you don't necessarily have to use dividers, but it's going to make it much easier if you do have dividers. So I'm lucky enough that I have a soap mould and I have dividers for it, so that's great. And then additions to my soap, I'm using some titanium dioxide, but colours, I'm having Red Riot from Mica Mama. Now this is much more of a sort of deep pink, very deep pink, sort of, I guess, like a rhubarby colour. Some Lime from You Make It Up, and some Purple Heart from You Make It Up. And the fragrance oil that I'm using today is Black Plum and Rhubarb, and that's from Candle Shack in the UK. Now, if you're doing this technique, you do need a well-behaved fragrance oil that's not going to accelerate on you, because it's done in a very similar way to a Taiwan Swirl, so you do need to be able to move the soap nice and fluidly to get a good result. And while we're talking about Taiwan Swirls, you'll often see videos with Mantra Swirls in it, and they're not actually Mantra Swirls. There is a difference between a Taiwan Swirl and a Mantra Swirl, and we'll talk about that as we get to that part on the video. So I've got my melted oils. This is all of the oils that I need for this entire recipe, and already into this jug. I know I've probably mentioned it before, but I'm going to do it again. Is if you're trying to prevent air bubbles in your soap, one of the things that causes air bubbles is when you pour your oils around. Have a look next time when you pour your oils into something, it will contain a lot of bubbles. So therefore, if you can get your oils into the container that you're going to be mixing them on early as they're cooling down, then that's a good thing. Okay, so if you master batch your oils or something like that, then, pour them out early into your jug and leave them to settle to dissipate some of those bubbles. So I've got all my oils and my lye solution. Temperature-wise, I'm working at the lower range of my temperatures, because remember, I want this to stay fluid. So my oils should be low 80s. As you can see that, 83 degrees. And my lye solution, again, low 80s, very low 80s, 80.7. Okay, so that's my lowest sort of range. I always soak between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Sometimes, if I want something to set up quicker, I will soap higher, but that's my sort of nice margin for good soaping. I don't tend to go lower than that because it can cause my recipe to have a false trace. So, just adding my lye solution to my oils. I do have sodium lactate in there. I use sodium lactate in all of my soaps at a rate of 1.32% of oils. Okay, I know that sounds picky, but that works out kind of 1 teaspoon per pound. Okay, so we just need to bring this up to an emulsion and then start splitting off for our colours. Now, if you're unsure about spotting emulsion, I have a whole video on how to spot emulsion and also things like false trace and everything, and I'll leave a link to that in the description box below. And I have some very clear examples showing you when you've got emulsion or not. And when I want a fluid recipe, I will always just take mine to emulsion, or even potentially slightly before, and then I will wait for it to come to a trace. And that's what I'm going to do here, because I want this to stay fluid. I'm going to split this off into 4 colours. I'll just go and do that and then come back.
So I've taken each one of those coloured micas and I've dispersed them just into a little bit of oil from the base recipe.
So I've divided up my soap batter with those little bits of mica in the bottom, and we'll just give those a stir and get those colours coming through. Can you see how with that red ripe mica, as I said, it's not really a red, but it is a lovely deep pink colour. I do really like it, but it's not the colour that I use if I want to make red. And then just mixing in my titanium dioxide. And again, I know I've said this in lots of videos, but if you pre-disperse your titanium dioxide properly, then there's no need to blend it in with a stick blender. If you find that you're putting your titanium dioxide in your batter, if you blend it and your batter gets whiter, it means you didn't disperse it properly. And there's no problem. If you like blending your titanium dioxide into your soap batter, then that's fine. But the problem with TD is people always say that it accelerates their batter. One of the reasons it accelerates their batter is because they're stick blending it into their batter. Okay, so if you're finding that when you blend your batter, your TD gets whiter, you're not dispersing it properly. And again, I've got a video that shows you how to disperse it properly. So all you need to do is stir it in and you won't get any of those white speckles or anything. So those are my colours, and I've got my fragrance oil. Now I'm just going to divvy this up by eye. I'm quite lucky I've got a little, this jug has a little sort of measuring bit on it so I can sort of see how much I'm doing. And the reason I'm happy to just divide this up by eye is it's a swirl, so everything is going to end up being sort of mixed together anyway, so I'm not going to have any specific layers or anything. But also, it's a fragrance oil with a good high usage rate. So it's certainly one of those fragrance oils that it doesn't matter. If I put all of that lot into one section, it still wouldn't make that part of the soap above the IFRA limit. Okay, and make sure as you divide your fragrance oil up, get it mixed in straight away. Okay, if you leave your fragrance oil sitting on top of your soap, then it can react badly with your soap because it's so concentrated in one area. And a lot of people think their fragrance oil is ricing, when actually it's not. It's just that you've just put so much in one area that it's had an effect. I mean, of course, you could have a fragrance oil that rices, but just remember, get it mixed in as soon as you pop it into your soap. And mix it in really thoroughly. If I was going to blend any more at this stage, and I tend not to, the only reason I would blend would be to ensure that my fragrance oil was mixed in beautifully, rather than trying to blend in colours. But I'm going to stir this fragrance oil. Okay, so I'm going to just wait for a little while just to get the slightest trace on these, and then we'll start our pour. And whilst I'm waiting, we'll just talk about our mould. Okay, now I'm lucky enough to have a lovely mould. This is from Custom Craft Tools. A lovely mould, and it's got dividers in it. You can get dividers for all sorts of moulds. They're not a rare thing to come across nowadays, so they're pretty easy to come across. And you can either get dividers that will fit into moulds that you've already got. If you haven't got dividers, then you can make some yourself. You can just put some cardboard at the end and then put some cardboard strips in. I have used dividers, just plain, nice, clean cardboard, because you're just using them once. To be safe, you might want to cover them with some tape or something just to stop them going soggy. This is a pretty quick pour. So if you don't have dividers, you can just do some temporary dividers yourself. And then what I've also done with mine is I've actually made the middle part. This divider will divide my soap into 4 bits. And what I did is I didn't want them to all be even. So therefore, I actually decided deliberately to make my middle part fatter than my end parts for this Mantra Swirl. And I'm going to have an individual colour in these 2 ends. And then I'm going to have 2 colours in the middle. Okay, so that's my plan. Right, see how these spatter's doing. This fragrance does smell gorgeous. This was one of the very first fragrances that I ever bought when I made soap. And it was the first fragrance that I discovered in the UK that really held its fragrance even with the low usage rates that we have in the UK. And it didn't accelerate and it didn't discolour, you know. And I remember that at the very start of my soap making journey, that when I actually discovered this fragrance on, I was so thrilled. And it's been a favourite ever since. Now my battery's still barely at a trace, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start getting it in the mould, and that'll be fairly safe because this is not a pour where everything's going to mud all together because I'm keeping it separated with dividers. Now with your dividers, the best way to fill them up, especially if you've got homemade cardboard ones or something, is to, let me just get all these spatulas out of the way, is to pour a little bit in first. What you're trying to do is soap, I'm sure you've seen it in lots of situations when you do pours, soap will butt up against each other and stop. So therefore it does act as a nice barrier. So if you've got dividers, lost the word there, if you've got dividers that aren't that great, pouring a little bit of soap in the bottom will actually help. So push your hand down on them. And just get your first bit of soap poured. And that will help stop any problems with leakage underneath. Now you could do this middle section with squeeze bottles, but I know not everyone loves a squeeze bottle, so I'm just doing it with lines and I'm just going to alternate through. Now when you're working with dividers, you don't have to be too fussy about keeping it super even as you pull it, but you may find, depending on how fat your dividers are, they will start to bow with the weight of the soap. So if you can keep sort of an even amount of soap on each side of the divider, then that can help, especially if you've got those sort of cardboardy dividers. If you've got proper dividers, then that's not as important for you to worry about. stage, do try and have your soap even. Just because if one bit's higher than another, you're going to find as you take your soap apart, you take your dividers out, one will flow into the other area. Okay, so I'm going to pull these dividers out. Now, as I pull them out, I'm not going to scrape them just because I'm thinking about speed. You could scrape them. I'm just going to pull them out, and then the scrapings that come off, I'll just use for a little sample soap. So I'm literally just going to pull mine out and pop them into this jug. Don't forget, if you've got proper dividers, as it were, take those ends out as well. And then your soap will drop a little bit. Now, you can plan for that, or like me, I'm just going to go in and just top that up. Be careful that you don't ruin your design by doing this. So the only reason I was so fussy about getting all that soap batter in is partly not to waste it, but also as well, we're going to do a horizontal cut on this soap. And for me, with this mould, I need it to be pretty well to the top to end up getting some decent thickness soap bars out of it. I don't like my soap bars being all skinny when I've done a horizontal cut. Now this has started to thicken a bit, so I'm using quite a thick tool to swirl it. As you can see, this is just a stainless steel knife. Now the difference between a Taiwan swirl and a Mantra swirl. Taiwan goes up, down, up, down. Mantra swirl is a figure of 8. So it's key with our mantra that we go in and we need to figure of 8 it. And for me, having the extra thickness of the batter in the middle helps to put that design all the way through the soap. There we are, there's our Mantra Swirl. So, as I said, we're not going to do anything to the top, because remember, this is going to be a horizontal cut. This is going to be the face of the bars. I'm going to leave this, cover it, pop it overnight, and then we'll come back tomorrow and cut it. So here's our Mantra Swirl the next day, and remember, we're going to cut this just like we do a Taiwan Swirl. So we need to cut it so that this is the top of the bar. So we're not going to cut it vertically, we're going to cut it horizontally. Now I'm quite lucky, I've got a nice snazzy horizontal soap cutter, but if you haven't, don't worry about it. If you've got a normal single wire cutter, all you would do is you would just chop it into chunks first of all. Remember, this will be the length of your bars. Chop it into chunks and then turn it on its side, and just again with your single wire cutter, just chop it that way. You can do it very easily with a single wire cutter. If you've got a knife, again, exactly the same. Chop, chop down there with your knife, then take each of those blocks, flip it on the side, and just cut each of those blocks. Okay, you don't need an expensive log splitter or anything. Okay, as I said, I'm quite lucky. I do have my lovely little caterpillar, they call it, from Custom Craft Tools. So I'm just going to slice a very tiny bit off the end, just to tidy up that end bit. Just, oops, that wasn't very good, was it? Maybe a little bit more than that. That's me being all stingy and trying not to waste soap. Okay. So there we are. So just get the sort of, it's always a little bit untidy right at the end, isn't it? And I'll do the same the other side. And we're going to do this first and then measure what I've got remaining. Not be quite so tight on that. Okay. Here's some teeny weeny little bits off. Now obviously it's up to you how big you want your bars to be. So I'm just going to measure this. And mine is 26.4 centimetres. And I think I'm going to want 3 bars out of that. So let's just do 26.4 divided by 3. And that will give me a bar that's 8.8 centimetres. Okay. Let's try 26.4 divided by 4. And that will give me a bar that's 6.6 centimetres. That's too small. I like the idea of the 8.6. So it's sort of almost a tall and skinny type shape. Now again, if you can't get the exact size bar that you want, you could always chop off one vertical bar or something at the end, if that makes your rest of your bar size fit in with your range or your boxes or whatever it is that you've got. Okay, so I've forgotten what I wanted. 26.4 divided by 3, I said. So 8.8 I want. So as I said, if you had a single bar cutter, you could do this in exactly the same way with your normal single bar cutter. One chunk off. Two chunks off. Now I'm very happy with both the top and the bottom of my soap. To me, there's nothing wrong with them. I've got, I guess if you really analyse it, you could say there's a tiny weeny little bit of doneness on there. It might be a fraction of soda ash, I can wipe that off, but it's certainly not enough to warrant planing the soap. And also when I look at the soap from the top and the sides, it's quite nice and level, so I don't feel the need to waste soap and get rid of that extra bit. So again, I'm just going to mark this out. And this was one of the reasons, remember when we were doing that pour, I was very conscious of trying to get that extra soap into my mould, because I knew I needed my soap nearly to the top of that mould to get me 3 nice bars that I wanted. If I'd have just pulled out those dividers, my soap would have been a lot lower, and then I'd have either had to do 2 funny fat bars or some skinny bars, which would have been sort of outside my normal size that I do for my soaps. Okay, so just thinking about it as you plan your soaps. Okay, so there's our first swirl. Let's just carry on doing that for the other bars.
So I have managed to get this video slightly longer than I wanted it, but that sometimes happens with these. You can make these soap videos because I like to go into more detail. So I'm just going to end it here on the cut and not worry about some final photos, because you can see what the soap looks like. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, folks, and if you have, it would be great if you gave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Happy soaping!